and blood.
Jellied fuel, flat sunken tires, a hinge that won't move without a fight. That's what they found. Not on a movie set, not mid-shot, mid-stunt, mid-desert. In a shed. Years after the cameras had gone home, the man who built the most famous truck of the last decade walked back in the storage and found it half dead. You'd think a machine built to survive the end of the world would at least survive a warehouse. It didn't. Not cleanly. And what happened to it after the credits rolled is stranger and less finished than anything that happened to it on screen. Every apocalypse needs a workhorse. Fury Road's was a water tanker with a body count. The concept existed before the film did, by over a decade. An artist named Tony Wright sketched the earliest version around 1999. Brown and gold paint, chrome stacks, the bones of something between a stagecoach and a semi. He left the project early. Another artist, Peter Pound, picked the idea back up in 2001 and refined it into something closer to what audiences would eventually see. That version sat on paper for another 11 years before a single weld went into building it, because the production it belonged to spent most of a decade stuck in development limbo, waiting for financing, waiting for a green light, waiting for the world to catch up to what George Miller wanted to build. So by the time anyone cut metal, the truck had already lived an entire life as an idea. That's worth sitting with. Most vehicles get designed, built, and used inside a single production cycle. This one got dreamed up in one century and born in the next. When it finally arrived on screen, it wasn't just a prop. It was the spine of the movie. Every major character's arc runs through it at some point. It's the thing being chased, the thing being protected, the thing that turns a chase movie into something closer to a siege. Audiences didn't just notice it, they named it, cataloged it, argued about its engineering in comment threads for years afterward. Rare for a truck. Rare still for a truck that's mostly there to move water. Here's the detail that gets lost in the spectacle. This thing wasn't built to look tough. It was built to actually be tough. Because the alternative was a production disaster in the middle of a desert with no hardware store for 1,000 miles in any direction. The base is a Tatra T815, a Czech all-wheel drive heavy truck with a reputation earned the hard way, through the Dakar Rally, through decades of getting torn apart by terrain that ends lesser vehicles. That reputation is why it got chosen. Production designer Colin Gibson needed a chassis, engine, and transmission combination guaranteed not to strand a chute mid-scene. He'd seen what Tatra trucks could survive in competition. He bet the production on it. Confirmed, corroborated across multiple accounts from the art department itself, the standard Tatra powertrain, an air-cooled V8 rated around 275 horsepower, cooled by a turbine fan hidden behind a custom grille, turned out to be underpowered for what the film actually demanded. Hauling a tanker, a half-Chevy body, a Volkswagen Beetle welded on as a gun turret, plus rigging, cabling, and crew gear across sand at speed, asked more of the truck than even its rally pedigree could deliver stock. So one of the 3 units built got fitted with a second-hand 500-horsepower Tatra factory racing engine instead, a solution to a problem the reliability logic itself had created. That's the quiet irony sitting inside the build. They chose Tatra because it doesn't break. It still needed more than Tatra could give it. The rest of the vehicle is a graft job with real craft behind it. The cab was relocated from its stock position over the engine back to the center of the chassis, giving the whole truck a longer, more predatory nose. The rear half of the cab is a widened 1947-48 Chevrolet Fleetmaster sedan, cut down the middle and stretched to fit. Chosen, according to the build team, partly because Fleetmasters were common enough to source multiple times over during a production that went through more than 30 dozen design revisions before landing on a final look. 3 fully functional units came out of that process, built identically so they could be swapped in and out of shots without continuity problems. A fourth, non-driving buck, just the cab, no chassis behind it, existed purely for close-up work with the actors. The superchargers visible on screen, the second engine block bolted up front for show, those are dummies. Fiberglass and electric motors, doing a job that only needs to look real from 30 feet away. It's shot across Namibia, not Australia, a location swap forced on the production by unseasonal rain that turned the original Broken Hill site too green to read as a dead world. Everything had to work in that desert, under that heat, for real, because Miller's mandate for the whole vehicle fleet was function over illusion. No exceptions for a truck this size. 18 wheels, 78 feet of steel, and it still had to keep pace with the chase. The truck doesn't just carry cargo in the story, it carries the entire premise, an escape, a rescue, a reason for everyone else in the film to be moving at all. That's a lot of narrative weight to put on a vehicle. It holds it. Here's where the story stops being simple. After the shoot wrapped, the units didn't scatter the way movie vehicles often do, sold off piecemeal, quietly vanishing into private garages, untraceable within a few years. For a while, at least 2 of the 3 functional builds stayed together, reportedly relocated to a warehouse in Kelso, New South Wales by 2017. That detail comes from fan-maintained sources rather than a studio statement, so treated as reported but unverified rather than settled fact. A separate, better-documented thread exists for the 3rd unit. The truck damaged in an on-camera rollover stunt reportedly had its chassis sold back to Tatra's Australian distributor afterward. Again, reported but not independently confirmed by a primary source. Then, in 2021, something happened that complicates the whole picture. An Australian auction house began soliciting private offers, not a public auction, a closed tender for 13 vehicles from the film, the war rig among them, sold together as a single collection. The listing called it a truly once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to own an entire museum of modern masterpieces. The auction house reported enormous interest, 100 calls and emails a day, 3 full collection offers, more than 50 bids on individual vehicles, inquiries from Las Vegas casinos and American car museums. The vendors, confirmed to be Miller and producer Doug Mitchell themselves, wanted the set to stay together. It didn't sell. Not to any of those bidders, not as a set, not piecemeal. No public source documents a completed transaction, a final price, or a buyer. The tender closed on September 26, 2021, and then the trail simply goes quiet. That's not where the story ends, though. It's where it gets interesting. In 2023, when production began on a prequel set years before the events of this film, Colin Gibson went looking for exactly this truck. He found it, along with 11 others he calls, without much ceremony, the Dirty Dozen, sitting in that same Australian storage, unsold, untouched, quietly falling apart. Fuel that had turned to jelly, tires sunk flat under years of static weight. Gibson, by his own account, found the whole scene sadder than he expected. A truck engineered to survive a fictional apocalypse had spent years slowly losing a much smaller, much more mundane war against time and neglect. It got pulled out, cleaned up, used, but not, it seems, resurrected as a hero vehicle in its own right. Gibson describes using the surviving fleet as design reference, a way to build an evolution of vehicles for the new film, showing what these machines might have looked like earlier in their own fictional histories. The prequel's own version of a war rig is, in fact, a different vehicle entirely. A Kenworth W900 build, purpose-made, explicitly treated in the story as an earlier prototype. Not this truck, a different truck wearing a version of the same idea. So did the original Tatra-based rig make it back onto a movie screen in new footage, or does its final on-camera appearance remain the 2015 film, with later glimpses achieved through archival footage rather than a fresh take? Multiple accounts describe the newer film's closing moments leaning on footage of the original film's star rather than new photography of the restored truck. Nobody has laid that out definitively. Call it stated unknown and leave it there, because that's the honest place to leave it. What can be said with confidence? It exists. It didn't sell. It didn't get scrapped. As of the most recent verifiable account, it's back in production hands, cleaned up enough to be useful, sitting somewhere in Australia in a state that is neither retired nor active. Not lost, not really found either, just present tense indefinitely. You cannot buy this truck. Nobody could, apparently, even when it was explicitly for sale. What you can buy is the platform underneath it. Tatra T815s exist in the real world outside the film entirely. Civilian and ex-military units move through the specialist heavy truck and overland build market, appealing to the same audience that respects the vehicle for the reason the production originally chose it: a backbone tube chassis and drivetrain built to take terrain that ends other trucks. That's not movie mythology. That's the actual engineering reputation, earned in competition long before Hollywood noticed it. Anyone drawn to this build isn't just chasing a prop replica. They're chasing a genuine piece of extreme-duty engineering with a documented competition pedigree. Dakar tested, not just desert-dressed. The market for these is a narrow, specialist one. Parts sourcing in particular isn't a weekend parts store errand. It means dealing with a niche global supply chain built around a truck manufacturer most American buyers have never heard of. That's part of the appeal for the right person, and a real barrier for everyone else. Most famous movie vehicles get one of two endings. They're preserved, polished, and put behind glass somewhere fans can visit. Or they're gone, sold for parts, crushed, lost to a fire or flood or just time, with nobody keeping records. This one got a third kind of ending, and it might be the most honest one. Still around, still real, still not entirely accounted for. Built to survive an apocalypse that never happened, and quietly surviving a much smaller one that did. A storage unit, a failed sale, a few years nobody was watching. It's still out there. That's the whole update. For now, that has to be enough.